Chock's Hangar. You ready? Revving up your engines, listen to them howl and roar. Pedal under tension, begging you to touch and go. I'm sure you recognise the tune that I was murdering there as Danger Zone by Kenny Loggins, which was the theme tune to the original Top Gun movie, which featured the F-14 and Tom Cruise and Kelly McGillis and all that kind of stuff. But I'm sure you know, if you're a fan of aviation, that there is a new Top Gun movie, which obviously it's updated and filmed recently, and that features the A-18 Hornet and Super Hornet. And that's why I was playing the tune, because today we are looking at the FSX and P3D flight simulator version of the A-18 Super Hornet, which has just been made by DC Designs. And just before we have a look at that, I'll just mention there'll be a word from our sponsor at the end of the video, which is airmodels.net. And they've got some really cool models of F-18 Super Hornets, including one which looks very, very similar to the one featured in this video, so check that out. But right now, let's get on with the review, the look at, or whatever you want to call it, of the DC Designs F-18 Super Hornet. And I promise I won't sing again. How's that?
Okay, so here we are in the sim looking at the DC Designs F-18 Super Hornet. Now, I hope you like long reviews because this is going to be a very detailed one. First, I'm going to talk about the product that you buy. Then, I'm going to give you a little bit of a history of the real aeroplane if you don't know much about the Hornet and the Super Hornet. Then, we're going to have a detailed look at the plane on the outside and the inside. Then, we're going to take it for a test flight. Then, we are going to do a carrier landing on a compatible product, which this is designed to work with. So there's a lot to look at, so let's crack on. Okay, now, I bought this DC Designs F-18 Super Hornet from the Just Fly online store, which cost me $26.99. That's pounds sterling. If you are working in dollars or working in euros, there's not much difference in exchange rate, so it's probably going to be a similar price, maybe a little bit less. So I'd guess around 25. Yeah. Now, for that price, you get a download of it, which includes the Super Hornet E, F, and G models. The download size is 239 megabytes, and it works in all versions of FSX and all versions of P3D. The exception to that being if you've got an original version of FSX without the sort of souped-up accelerator add-on. I don't think many people have got that these days. So if you've got FSX Steam, you'll be fine. Now, 239 megabytes, not of great size for a pay-wear add-on aircraft, and there's a couple of reasons for that. The first reason is that you only get 9 paint jobs with it, so you get 3 variants and you get a couple of paint jobs of each, the E, F, and the G. In that download, you also get a 53-page PDF manual. More about that in a moment. And you also get a layered PSD file. That's a Photoshop file, so that you can do repaint yourself. Effectively, it's a paint kit. Now, just as an aside, if you are interested in doing paint jobs, but you're not great with Photoshop and you've got any problems with that, or you want to know something about it, keep in mind that in addition to doing my aviation-related stuff on Chock's Hangar, I am an Adobe certified expert instructor on Photoshop. So if you've got any questions about how to use paint kits or anything like that, stick a question in the comments of this video if you like, and I'll see if I can help you out on that. Now, back to the PDF manual, 53 pages. Now, that's not massive, but it's not really, really tiny. But keep in mind that the manual is quite light and airy, that it's not very wordy. There's the text is quite large and readable, and there are pictures on the page. And also keep in mind that of that 53 pages, there is an index which is several pages long, intros, credits at the end. There's 1 or 2 adverts at the end of it for other Just Flight products. So realistically, concerning all the stuff that you need to read in order to sort of learn everything about this plane, you're probably looking at about 30 pages of the PDF. And as I say, the pages are not very wordy. So it's a good manual, won't take you long to read. It'll teach you everything about how to learn to fly the plane, operate all the switches in the cockpit, how to fly a circuit properly, how to land it on an airfield or a carrier and all that kind of stuff, how to do intercepts, blah, 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 all that stuff. So great manual. Again, 239 megabytes, not a massive file size yet, and that is because if we have a look at this thing, if I zoom in on it a little bit, I'm going to come in on the thing, and I will zoom it a little bit if I can. You can see that when you get really, 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 really close, the textures are not massively detailed, and that is so that it keeps the frame rates up. And the same is true of the polygons that have been used to create the model. They've not gone overboard with it. They've kept it sort of fairly speedy in terms of how it runs in the sim, and I think they've done a good job of that because if you look at it, you could see that it is a very nice model. I'm just going to sort of give you a bit of a move round view of the thing. Now, if you're wondering how I'm moving this camera, what I'm using Chase Plane, which is an excellent camera add-on that you can get for FSX and P3D. I recommend that. Now, you might also be wondering how I've got all of these planes on the ramp, and I've done that using Lorbe's WAMA, which is Where Are My Aircraft, which is another excellent add-on that's definitely worth having. And I've added in all these planes for a good reason. Obviously, one of the things that's difficult to know when you see a review like this is how will this thing run on my system? You know, you might have a computer that's not the best, and you might be worried about if it's going to run okay in your system. So what I've done here for this review is I have deliberately ramped up loads of things in P3D. We're in P3D version 4 here. To make the sim struggle as much as possible. So where we are is we're at UK 2000's Liverpool John Lennon Payware add-on airport. I have the AI running with airliners on 100%. That's using Just Flight's Traffic Global. I've got the graphics ramped up fairly high so that you can see all the sort of nice features of this model. But what I have also done is I have added in lots of aircraft on the ramp, and these are not simple AI models. These are payware aircraft, a lot of them with PBR textures that I have added in order to get this thing to really make P3D struggle. So what we've got there is we've got a Just Flight payware Spitfire, an A2A payware Spitfire, another Just Flight payware Spitfire, different variant, another Just Flight payware Spitfire, again a different variant, it's a 5B, a payware Hurricane, a payware Mosquito, I think that might be a freeware Tiger Moth, a payware flight replicas, Hispano Suiza HA112, which is the Spanish license built version of the Messerschmitt 109. That's painted in the scheme that one or two of those wore in the 1969 movie, The Battle of Britain. So if you didn't know that, there's a fun fact for you. One or two of the aircraft playing the roles of Hurricanes in the Battle of Britain movie were actually licensed built Messerschmitt 109s. There is a payware P51C there. There is a payware P51D there. If we come across here, there is a payware Messerschmitt 262, a payware Focke-Wulf 190D, that I believe is Classics Hangar, German developer. There is a payware Messerschmitt 109G. That is, there's a bit of AI just about to drive through that plane. So you can see I've got the ground traffic on as well. That is, I think, flight replicas. There's a another payware Messerschmitt 109E. There's another, I think that's flight replicas. Merlin engined Hispano Suiza HA1112 in the paint scheme that they wore for that Battle of Britain movie that was made in 1969, the one with everyone in it. That is a freeware Heinkel HE51. That is the used to be payware, but is now freeware Milviz Junkers 87 Stuka, and that is a payware Aeroplane Heaven Heinkel HE111 with PBR textures on it. You can probably tell they're PBR textures if I kind of move that around. You can see the glinting on it. It's got animated crew in it. In addition to that, for talking about the history of the FA-18 Hornet and Super Hornet, I've got a few sort of related models in there. So that's a freeware F4 Phantom, a freeware F14 Tomcat, and I've got the original FSX FA-18 Hornet, which I've shoehorned into P3D. So there are a lot of flyable detailed models here, as well as the Traffic Global AI, as well as us being at a payware airport, as well as some of my own scenery that I've put in here, including the Chock's Hangar. And this thing is not struggling on frame rate, so you can get an idea of the thing running well. And that's not even mentioning the fact that I am also recording this at 30 frames per second at full screen resolution to Fraps and recording this voiceover for you as well. And Fraps is notorious for tanking your frame rates. So if you are concerned that this thing won't run well in your sim, unless you've got the worst PC in the world, this thing will run pretty well. Now, excuse me. Before we take a look inside, I said I was going to talk about a little bit about the history of the FA-18. So we'll do that now. At the start of the video, I was mentioning the original Top Gun movie, and you know that the original Top Gun movie featured this aeroplane, which is the F-14 Tomcat. And that was the Navy's Interceptor. It's retired now. Before it retired, it got sort of demoted a little bit from the Interceptor role to being an attack aircraft, and they called it the F-14 Bombcat. But it is no longer with the US Navy and Top Gun and all this lot. So the new movie, the new Top Gun movie, Top Gun Maverick, features the FA-18 Hornet and Super Hornet. Now, the origins of the FA-18 Hornet are kind of related to a lot of other aircraft, and specifically when the F-14 was getting a little bit long in the tooth. What the US Navy wanted to do was they wanted to update the F-14. So they got in touch with Grumman and said, can you do us an improved, updated, more modern version of the F-14? And Grumman said, yep, sure can. And they came up with some specifications and delivered a price for it. And they were like, oh, and the US State Department saw that potential price and went, no. That's a bit expensive. Can you look at cheaper options, which the Navy weren't exactly thrilled about. And so what the Navy were told to do now, at the time that decision was made, or that decree was given to the US Navy, a couple of years before, so we're talking early 70s here to mid 70s. A couple of years before, the US Air Force had been told pretty much the same thing with regard to the F-15, because the F-15 is a very expensive aeroplane, and the Air Force were looking at upgrading it, which they did. They did the strike versions of it, which was the F-15E, two-seater versions and all that kind of stuff. But the US Air Force got told by the State Department, it's like, that F-15, it's a bit expensive. Can you look at some cheaper options for aircraft which will supplement the F-15s that you've got? So what they were looking for was a lighter, cheaper aircraft which they could get in greater numbers to supplement the sort of air superiority capabilities of the F-15. And that was their lightweight fighter program. Now, what the US Air Force did was they issued some specifications, and they got in touch with all of the main US aircraft manufacturers and went, this is the kind of thing that we want, come up with your ideas. And from all the aircraft companies that offered suggestions and proposed potential designs, the US Air Force picked two of the likeliest candidates. So they picked one from Northrop and they picked one from General Dynamics. And the two prototypes were built. In fact, there were actually two of each prototype from each company. So there were four prototypes, but it was two types of aircraft, and they were designated as all things that are being tested with a number, a letter designation, but also the letter Y in front of them. So the YF-16 and the YF-17 were the designations. The General Dynamics proposed fighter prototype was designated the YF-16, and the one from Northrop was designated the YF-17. Now, Northrop had made the F-5 Tiger and the F-20 Tiger Shark, which is a very, very good dogfighting aeroplane. Chuck Yeager was a very, very strong advocate of the F-5 and the F-20. He said it was like a real pilot's airplane and a great dogfighter. But it was a lightweight, cheaper aircraft, not sort of an expensive thing like the F-14 or the F-4 Phantom or what have you. And when Northrop were proposing something for the US Air Force for this cheaper, lightweight fighter, they based their design on their F-5 and F-20 Tiger Shark, and they came up with what was designated the YF-17. And the YF-17 looked a lot like the A-18 Hornet. I can show you a picture of it here. Now that's the YF-17 and the YF-16 in formation, and you can see that the YF-17 looks a lot like the Hornet, and obviously the YF-16 looks a lot like the what eventually became the F-16. Now, so the U.S. Air Force tested the YF-17 and the YF-16, and of the two, they liked the YF-16, so they picked that, and it subsequently went into production a few years later as the F-16, and it was incredibly successful and still flies to this day and is very impressive, and successfully sold abroad and manufactured abroad by Fokker and all kinds of stuff. There's loads of F-16s. If you've ever been to an air show, you can't really fail to have seen an F-16, a massively successful aeroplane. But the US Navy were told when they were after upgrading their F-14 to look at the aircraft that the US Air Force had built for this lightweight fighter competition. So the US Navy looked at the YF-16 and they looked at the YF-17, and they didn't like the F-16. Now, there were a few reasons that they didn't like the F-16. The F-16 is a great aeroplane, but it not necessarily make a great Navy fighter. In order for it to be a Navy fighter, for a kickoff, it would have to be considerably beefed up to be able to manage carrier landings, because I'm sure you know carrier landings can be at a descent rate of up to 600 feet per minute. They're kind of like a controlled crash. You don't even flare very much for a carrier landing. You really slam the thing on the deck and the arrestor hook pulls you to a halt. So you need a tough aeroplane for it to be able to do Navy operations. Now, the other thing that they didn't like about the F-16 was because they thought to beef up the F-16 for it to be able to do carrier landings and carrier launches, because carrier launches take a lot of strain on an aeroplane because you have to have an attachment to the nose gear, and the thing is accelerated from 0 to sort of 200 miles an hour in a few hundred feet, which puts a lot of stress on the airframe. So, and they thought that in beefing up the F-16, General Dynamics would have had to have added a lot of weight to the aircraft, which would have reduced its capability. Now, that was one reason that they didn't pick it. The other reason they didn't pick it was because the F-16 is a single-engined aeroplane, and traditionally the Navy has not really liked single-engined jet aircraft, because if one of the engines fails, they are going to lose that fighter or bomber or whatever, or strike aircraft into the drink. So they've whenever they could, they've shied away from single-engined aircraft on carriers, and you can see that that's the case. The F-14 has two engines. The F-4 Phantom has two engines, and the F-A-18 Hornet and Super Hornet have two engines. So they saw the YF-17 that Northrop had built for the competition for the USAF, and they preferred that out of the two. So they said to Northrop, they said, yeah, we like your YF-17, but can you beef it up and navalize it for us, and then we'll talk. Now, Northrop didn't have much experience of building Navy jet fighters. But Grumman, who'd built the F-14, and McDonnell Douglas, who'd built the F-4 Phantom, um, had a lot of experience of building jet fighters for the Navy. So Grumman and McDonnell Douglas were contacted by Northrop, and Northrop were proposing that they team up. And of the two aircraft manufacturers, McDonnell Douglas was the one that teamed up with Northrop, because of course McDonnell Douglas had built this thing, the F-4 Phantom, which is, perhaps one of the most famous Navy interceptors of all time. So they picked a good partner. Not that they would have picked a bad partner if they'd have picked Grumman, because Grumman, of course, made the F-14 Tomcat. McDonnell Douglas and Northrop beefed up their YF-17, and it was designated the YF-18, and the Navy liked it, and they went, yeah, we'll have that. Now, at the time that the YF-17 was being proposed for the US Air Force, the Northrop was suggesting that the aircraft be called the Cobra, and there's a reason for that, and it's this. It's a bit more apparent on the Super Hornet than it is on the original Hornet, but you can see that it has these big curved leading edge extensions here to the wings, which look very much like the hood of a hooded Cobra, and the original F-18 has those. They're not as prominent on the original F-18, but they are there, and so that's why they were suggesting calling it a Cobra. Now, interestingly, at the time that the YF-17 was in that competition, the YF-16 didn't have an official name either, and General Dynamics was suggesting that they call that the Mustang II, and not, as it ended up being called, the Falcon, or Fighting Falcon, sometimes gets called the Viper. They were suggesting that be called the Mustang II because it had a big blister canopy that reminded them of the P-51 Mustang of World War II, i.e. the thing that you can see over there at kind of the end of the ramp there, which has a canopy that looks quite a lot like an F-16. So, what initially ends up being the actual name of things is not always the original name. So the Hornet could have been called the Cobra, but it ended up being called the Hornet. And the subsequent one that we're reviewing here is the Super Hornet. Now, funnily enough, the Navy used to call the F-4 Phantom the Rhino, believe it or not. But of course, they retired the F-4 Phantom, and now they have original FA-18 Hornets, and they have Super Hornets. Now, Hornet and Super Hornet sound very, very similar, and there could be confusion and what have you. So what the Navy call the Super Hornet is the Rhino. So, yeah, names-wise, things can get very, very confusing. So anyway, there you go. There's a little bit about the history of the FA-18 Hornet and Super Hornet. Now, when they are parked alongside one another, you can see that superficially they look very, very similar. However, the Super Hornet is not just super in name, it's also super in nature, because it is very much larger than the original Hornet. You can probably make that out, even though the Super Hornet is parked in the foreground. You can probably make out that it is a bit longer. The wheelbase is longer. And the actual aircraft is longer. It's the Super Hornet is 2 inches shy of being 3 feet longer than the original Hornet, and the wing area of the Super Hornet in comparison to the original Hornet is 44% larger. So it's kind of like a scaled up version of the original Hornet. Now, in being larger, it has greater fuel capacity, which gives it greater range and greater endurance, and it also is able to fit more hard points on it. The original Hornet has 9 hard points. The Super Hornet has 11 hard points on it for weapons. We've seen that these sort of leading edge extensions, lurkses or whatever you want to call them, are wider and more Cobra-like on the Super Hornet. That enables it to fly at higher angles of attack, so there's a slight difference to it. But if you saw a Hornet or a Super Hornet parked on its own, you might have difficulty telling which one was which. So there are a couple of good identifying things that will help you if you ever want to do that. One is these larger sort of leading edge extensions. Another very obvious one is if we come down and look at the original Hornet, you can see that it has very rounded air intakes, and they are pretty much in line with where the engines sit. They're a little bit splayed out, but they are pretty much in line with where the engines sit, whereas the Super Hornet has slightly wider spread air intakes, and they are sort of a parallelogram or rectangular, if you will, and you'll see that they're not necessarily in line with where the engine exhausts are. Now, there are a couple of reasons for that. One is that because this thing, the Super Hornet, can fly higher angles of attack, so it's a bit of a better dogfighter. It's more kind of like what the F-14 could do with its variable geometry wings. What the Hornet, Super Hornet, needed was it needed its air intakes redesigning so that at high angle of attacks, the airflow could still get to the engines. But what the makers did when they did that was they also spread the air intakes out a little bit and curved the ducting towards the engines. And there's a very good reason for that, and it is, excuse me, that if an enemy aircraft is going to intercept an enemy fighter or what have you, initially where it starts is a long way off, and it's using its radar to detect anything that is in its forward field of view, if you will, or its forward sort of radar range. And so what happens is it fires out radar signals, they hit the aeroplane it's detecting, and they bounce back towards the radar dish, and any returns are displayed on the screen in the cockpit, as you know. But one of the things that will enable an enemy aircraft to detect an aircraft that's coming towards it, or what have you, is if the radar beams that it fires out bounce off the rotating fans at the front of the engines. From the signature of the rotating fans, they can very often identify what type of plane it is. They can certainly identify that it's got two rotating fans. So that's a bit of a clue, and it will help them. But if you have curved ducts so that the radar signal can't go down there, hit the front rotating fans of the engine, and then bounce back to be picked up by an enemy aircraft, then it will have more difficulty identifying what that aircraft is. So that's kind of like a stealth capability. Now, it's not true stealth, but it does give it a little bit of a um, subterfuge, shall we say. So it's kind of a benefit of that. So there you go. There's a little bit about the FA-18 Super Hornet. Now, with that, let's take a look inside the thing. So here we are inside the FA-18 Super Hornet from DC Designs, and I'll give you a look at the interior of the cockpit, and we'll just kind of move about so that you can see those side views a little bit. So you got side panel there, the front panel here, down at the floor where the controls are, and some traditional analog dials, and then you've got a side panel at that side, and your ejector seat behind you. Now, not all of these switches work. Because this thing is designed to enable you to have a bit of fun, but it's not gonna fire the weapons. You can hang weapons off it. We'll see that. They look really cool, and there are a lot of them. But it's not designed for dogfighting in your flight sim. What it's designed for is having a bit of fun with a jet fighter that's reasonably realistic, and it will allow you to simulate realistic carrier landings. That's what it's about. So some of these switches work, but not all of them do. Now, an easy way for me to point out which ones work and which don't work is for me to hover the mouse over them, because anything that is an actual functioning switch will show a tooltip. So when I put my mouse over this one here, you can see it's giving me a tooltip. So we can see that fuel dumping works. We can go over the extend fuel probe, so we can see that that works. We can see that the APU switch works. We can see that the engine crank switches work. The the light switches work, the recognition lights and all that kind of stuff. You know, crossfeed is working on there. All of this stuff related to the engines, the fuel flow and what have you works. The launch bar for carrier launches works. The landing gear lever works. The parking brake lever works. All of these switches on the multifunction display work, and more about that when these things are powered up. Then over on the other side, the arrestor hook works. The wing fold mechanism works. More on that in a moment or two. Generator switches work, battery switches work. Some of this stuff down here, you know, doesn't work. You know, it's just for show and what have you. But the gist of what I'm saying here is that that everything that you would want to work to do realistic carrier operations will work on this thing. But if you want to be sort of dogfighting and firing missiles and stuff like that, then you're going to be better off with something like the VRS Superbug, or going getting DCS World and getting the Hornet in that, because the only thing this is going to let you do is mount missiles on the outside and then, you know, make whoosh noises as though you are firing them, because it's not really what it's about. Now, one of the things that you might be curious about concerning that is, can you do a realistic cold and dark start in this aeroplane? Because I know loads of people are obsessed with that. I don't quite get that myself, you know what I mean? Why everyone insists that everything has to be able to do a cold and dark start, but I know it matters to a lot of people. So the answer is yes, you can. But if you know anything about the FA-18 Super Hornet, you will know that you can do a quick start in an FA-18 Super Hornet, because the Super Hornet is the US Navy's main interceptor now. And so what they usually have on their carriers is they have what's known as a ready deck, which is a couple of fighters on the deck near the catapults or attached to the catapults, always ready to go, so that if there is an incoming threat to the carrier, they can launch a couple of fighters, and it won't take them very long to do that. Now, in order to do that, what you have to have you have a fighter that is pretty much ready to go. You know, so it'll already be armed. It might have the disarming wires on the missiles and stuff like that, so they're not going to go off on the deck. But you know, if they've got to launch it quickly, the crew can run over, pull out the arming wires, fold down the wings. They can be cranking the power on the thing quickly, and someone can be jumping in, pressing one button, starting the engines, and then the thing can get launched real quick. That's something that you do want to be able to do if you want to scramble a fighter really, really quickly. So yes, we've seen that this sort of thing is, you know, you can turn the fuel on, and then you can come over here and you can switch the battery on, and then you can put the generators on, and you can hear that starting to hum up, and we can see that it's starting to get power. But on an FA-18 Super Hornet, if you want to start it now, bear in mind that if you're going to start the engines on something, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you've not got the throttles fully forward, and you also want to make sure that you've got the parking brake on, otherwise you're going to set off. But on an FA-18 Super Hornet, what you can do is you can just hit this switch here, Master Start. Boom, like that, and that will start the thing up. So you can see that we're getting power here. Now I'm going to go on the external view so you can see this thing crank up. And you can hear it here crank up as well. Now, back in the cockpit. Kind of nice sounds there. It's pretty good, that, isn't it? But it does kind of get in the way of me doing the voiceover for this. So now we've heard it, boom, I'll turn it off. When we need to hear the engine sounds again, don't worry, I will turn that sound back on. But it kind of stomps over me doing the narration for this. So we'll keep it off for the moment. Now we've seen what switches work here. So it's got all the things, you know, like recognition lights and wing lights and what have you on here, and you know, some of these are kind of hidden a bit behind the throttle lever and what have you. So you might have to maneuver around a little bit to be able to see those, but of course, you know, you can do that. or you could use keyboard switches for it. But keep in mind that there are some of the formation light switches on this side as well. So I've got that thing on there now. If we now obviously it's a good idea to have lights on if you're firing up the engine. I always shout at pilots when they taxi on stand to me and they haven't got the anti-collision lights on. It's one of my personal pet hates for safety reasons. Now if we look outside, this thing is now flashing its lights, but we are in daylight. So if I go on the static view there, what I am going to do is I'm going to use one of P3D's features, which is that you can do a time preview on it, and I'm going to change the time very, very quickly to nighttime, and you can see what the night lighting looks like on this thing. So you can see that obviously the navigation lights are cool. They're lighting up other stuff in P3D because it's got all that dynamic lighting on. And you can see that what we've also got is we've got the what the Navy pilots call the slime lights. These things here, the sort of greenish glowing lights for low visibility operations, and those are lighting up. Those are operated by the last switch you saw me hit in the cockpit, which was one on the right hand side pedestal. Now I'm going to hit cancel, so we go back to daytime, and I'm going to go back in the cockpit. Now another thing you might have noticed when we were on the exterior view was, and if you missed it, I'll come back outside, is that the canopy was open. But what was also there was the pilots appeared. The pilots appear on the exterior model when you start the engines, so that's why they've appeared, because we've cranked up the engines. And you can see from this that if I zoom in a little bit, the modeling on them, they've not gone completely overboard with it, but it's good enough for nice exterior shots. Now I'm going to close the canopy, and there you go. Nice sort of kind of gold plating effect on the canopy there, which is kind of cool. So yeah, nice modelling on that. Now another thing that we want to see is we want to see the external stores on the thing. So I'm going to have to go back in the cockpit, and I'll show you how you do all that sort of thing. So there are a bunch of panels up here, and you can see that they've lit up now that we've got power to the aircraft. So what we'll do is I'll look at the ones that are already lit up. So this thing down in the I'll just zoom in here. This thing here is giving me information about engines and, you know, the temperatures and all that kind of stuff if I start messing around with the throttle and the nozzle settings. So pretty simple. Then what we've got is we've got a moving map display, and you can see that it's showing that I am at Liverpool John Lennon Airport, EGGP, or Echo Golf Papa if you prefer. Now I've done that on purpose because what I want to do is I want to do a carrier landing, so I want to be reasonably close to the coast, because I'm going to plonk a carrier in the water and we'll do a carrier landing on it. So that's why I'm at Liverpool John Lennon. But what that does tell you is that 35 miles to the west of Liverpool John Lennon is where I work in real life, which is Manchester Airport. And Manchester Airport has a lot of planes flying about, and lots of them route over Liverpool, depending on what departures they use. So because I've got AI traffic on, excuse me, this thing is using a lot of AI traffic, and it's still getting nice frame rates. I'm not, you know, struggling to move the camera around. So we've got a bit of a moving map that you could zoom in and out of and use for GPS navigation. And then what we've got up here is we've got on the left-hand side, we've got an MFD, which is a multifunction display. But on the right-hand side, we've got another MFD, multifunction display. Then what we've got is we've got this thing in the middle, which is the upfront control panel. And the MFDs on the original FA-18 Hornet, you had to use the buttons around the bottom and the side in order to operate it. On the Super Hornet, the MFDs in the Super Hornet have some touchscreen capability, and there's a bit of that going on in this version too. So there is a bit of touchscreen capability, but most of it is on the buttons. So let's have a look at that. Now, keep in mind that this is the, as we've seen, this is the two-seater variant of the FA-18 Super Hornet. And if you're not sure which one's which, I'll give you a quick and dirty guide to it. Most of the time, an FA-18E Super Hornet is a single-seater. There are a couple of exceptions to that. The Royal Australian Air Force has some FA-18 E's which are two-seaters, and one or two other users do, but most of the time, if it's a single-seater Super Hornet, it'll be an E model. Yeah? Most of the two-seater models are the F variant. With the exception of the G variant, which is the AWACS version. Now, that was a replacement for the Grumman Prowler, so the Navy call the FA-18G Super Hornet the Growler for obvious reasons, and they're two-seaters as well. And you can always tell a G variant from an F variant, even though they superficially look the same because they're both two-seaters, because on most F variants and most E variants, in fact, they'll probably have sidewinders on the wingtip rails, whereas a G variant is most likely to have some kind of jamming pods mounted on there because they're not really intended for dogfighting. So, there's a few identifiers for you of different versions, and you get the E, the F, and the G in this package from DC Designs. So let's have a look at what this MFD does. So we can see CHK checklist. Boom, like that. So we click on that and you can see I've got takeoff checklist. So it's giving me all the information about what I do and what elevator trim I have and all this kind of stuff. And the information for landing, make sure you've got your hook down, blah, 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 unless you're landing on a runway rather than a carrier. And what you do when you shut the thing down. Yeah, so it does some checklists. It's got HSI, horizontal situation indicator. Boom. So you got horizontal situation indicator, much like you get in, your Boeing 737 and your Airbus for navigation. Essentially a compass rose with a few bits of information on it. Then what we've got is this thing, weapon, WPN. Boom, like that. This will allow you to put weapons on your aircraft. You can't fire them, but you can admire them. So wingtip, aim 9. If you were in the included G models, it would be letting you put pods on there, jamming pods, that sort of thing. So, aim 9 Sidewinder. Let's have one on that wingtip. Let's have one on that wingtip. Now you can see that this thing has 11 pylons. That's the difference between this and the original Hornet. The original Hornet has 9 pylons. Yeah? So we want some of the pylons themselves, or MERs as they're sometimes called, multiple ejector racks. And what we'll do is we'll really load this thing up like crazy. So we'll put a flare pod on there, and we'll put some air-to-ground missiles on there. Bombs, and we'll put some 500-pound bombs on there, dumb bombs, and we'll put a centerline fuel tank on there, and let's put some 120 radar guided missiles on there as well. Boom, like that. Now we've got a fair old bit of stuff on there, so let's have a look outside at what that looks like. So if I go to the static view outside, there we go. You can see that it's got a lot of stuff on there. Now, a nice thing about this is you will notice that the paint scheme that's on this is VFA 103, which is the Jolly Rogers. Now, VFA 103 has not always been the Jolly Rogers. The Jolly Rogers insignia has belonged to a few different squadrons over the years, but it's one of the really famous ones in the Navy. So rather than get rid of it when squadrons consolidate, it's the emblem of the 103rd VFA now. But you'll notice that when I put the centerline tank on, it didn't just put a bog standard olive drab or bare metal tank on there. What it did was it put a centerline tank with the painting related to the squadron that the paint job is. So you can paint the ordnance as well, which is kind of cool. And obviously the skull and crossbones, so we've got Fear the Bones on there. So you can see that graphically this is a real labour of love, this, and there's some great details on it. So, full marks for that. I think they've done a really, really good job with the model of this. I think it's really cool. Now, being a Navy fighter, like most Navy fighters, it's got folding wings. So let's see that. So if we go back in the cockpit and we come over to this side, there is a wing fold mechanism. So let's hit the wing fold mechanism, and there you go. We can see the wings are folding up like that. Now, if I go back in the cockpit and hit the wing fold mechanism, one of the things that it will do, so don't get thrown by this, is I'm going to click it and you'll notice it doesn't move, but the wings are unfolding. It's just that the switch does not move until the things are locked in the spread position. That's how the thing works in real life, yeah, because they're in the process of unfolding, yeah. So don't be wildly clicking on this thing and wondering why they're not folding and unfolding, because it's not an instantaneous process. Of course, what I've done there is something that you wouldn't do in real life, which is you wouldn't fold the wings without putting the sort of disarming pins into into the ordnance first and what have you. But so that's normally what happens when you land on a carrier. You land on a carrier, you get the thing stopped and what have you, and then when you're sure that not people are not going to be sucked into the air intakes or what have you, the first thing people do is come over and put the safe pins in the ordnance, and then you can fold the wings, and then you can go and put them on the elevators and get them down in the hangar. Now, I'm going to keep the sidewinders on the wingtip, but what I will do is I'll get rid of all the rest of the stuff off there. So I'll get rid of the flare pod, get rid of that, get rid of the 500-pound bombs, get rid of the centerline tank, get rid of that, get rid of that, get rid of that, and I'll get rid of the racks as well, like that. So we're just going to have the sidewinders on the wingtips. And if we have a look at the external view now, you can see that it has done that. So there we are with just a couple of sidewinders on the wingtips. So if anyone wants to mess with us, they've got they're going to be in trouble, because we are still armed. Now, back on the interior. So next one along, HUD, head-up display, or heads-up display, as sometimes people call it, if they've got two heads. So we'll do that, and you'll see that what that is that as a decluttered repeater of the head-up display there. Now, it is kind of useful to have that, because sometimes you get a bit of sun glare, and it can be difficult to read the heads-up display. So you can always look down there and get it against a black background, and you're definitely not going to miss anything. Now, you'll note that I said that some switches don't work on this thing, and if we come here, you'll see if I move here, this is where some of the stuff related to TACAN is. You can see a switch there, and you can see channel switches and all this kind of stuff. Now, that does not mean that you cannot use the TACAN system on this thing. It's just that what you have to do is you have to use the MFDs to do that. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit and sort of recenter my view a little bit, like that. Oh, I think I probably want to go the other way. There we go, like that. And I probably want the parking brake on, which I have accidentally knocked off. And I don't think I want to do that. Now, so what I can do is if we zoom back in on this, I can hit TACAN on here. Boom, like that. And you'll see that I start getting TACAN navigation information. Now it says range 100,000 miles, bearing 180 and frequency 113.7. That's because I haven't tuned into a specific TACAN frequency. But what you can see on here is CVN 70, CVN 71 and CVN 72. Yeah? Now, CVN 70 is the USS Carl Vinson, which is a nuclear carrier of the Nimitz class. CVN 71 is another Nimitz class nuclear carrier, and that's the USS Theodore Roosevelt. And CVN 72 is yet another Nimitz class nuclear carrier, and that one's good old honest Abe, USS Abraham Lincoln. Now you can see that they have specific TACAN frequencies: 114.30, 114.40, and 114.50. So if I place a carrier using SimWorks Studios add-on carriers, what I can then do is I can tune in a TACAN frequency, and then it will give me range and bearing information so that I can find that carrier and navigate to it and perform a carrier landing. So we'll have a look at that when we get in the air and start trying that out. It's kind of cool. So you've got an upfront control panel here. Now the upfront control panel, and I will just talk about the stuff that's on here, but I'll show you how that TACAN stuff works. Now, so we can see autopilot on off, flight director, swap. Now, what this will let you do is this will let you swap your comm frequencies. I'm sure you know that to tune radios on aeroplanes, you have an active frequency and you have a standby frequency, and you always alter the standby frequency and then you swap the two. So that's what your swap button for the comm radios. This is your swap button for the nav radios. So the comm radio stuff is this stuff here, and the nav radio stuff is that stuff there. So there's a swap button there, there's a swap button there, but they don't do the same thing. Now we've got nav 1 hold, we've got GPS, we've got approach hold, we've got heading hold, we've got altitude, and we've got vertical speed. And as far as speed is concerned, you can have it as Mach and you can have it as indicated airspeed. So you've got that. So comm radios and nav radios. So that's what all that does. So let's have a bit of a look at it. What I will do is when we get up in the air, what I will do is I will place CVN 72, the USS Abraham Lincoln, out in the Irish Sea somewhere so that we can have a go at landing on it. So we can see that the TACAM frequency for the USS Abraham Lincoln CVN 72 is 114.50. So I would want to tune that in nav 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on these things here. So what we want to do is we want to get the nav megahertz frequency on 114. Now I can do that by rolling the mouse wheel. So I rolled the mouse wheel down and it went a little bit too far, and you can see I've got 115 on there. So I rolled it up a little bit and I've got 114, and then I want decimal 50. So I want the kilohertz here and I want to roll that a little bit. So here we go, 5550. So I've got 114.50. Now if I swap that using this thing here, what it will do is it will give me range and bearing information to the USS Abraham Lincoln, providing it is within 10,000 miles. Now, if I did it now, it wouldn't detect it because I haven't added it into the sim yet. But when I do add it, what I'll do is I'll swap that frequency and you'll see that that thing will work. So this is what the upfront control panel does. It relates to that TACAN stuff there. Now, the other MFD on the right-hand side is sort of similar in some respects, but it has some differences. So it will display checklists. It will display a horizontal situation indicator, but that's where it changes. You can see FCS, Flight Control Systems, boom, like that. Now that will give me some information about the aircraft. Now, the A-18 Super Hornet is a fly-by-wire aircraft, and if you know anything about fly-by-wire aircraft, you will know that what they have is they have built-in G limiters. So if you hang a lot of bombs off the wing, what they will do is they will limit the amount of G that you can pull so that you don't overstress the wings. However, because they are combat aircraft, they will usually have something on them which will allow you to override that at the expense of potentially causing a bit of stress to your airframe. And the A-18 Super Hornet is no exception to that. On the controls, you can see that they've got a lot of buttons. If you've got a HOTAS system yourself, you've probably got things like that yourself. And there is on the FA-18 Super Hornet, there is a little paddle that you can press that will override the G limits on it. So that's what it's displaying there. Now, you can see some information regarding the weight. So we can see MTOW, 66,000 pounds. We can see total weight of the aircraft is 53,946, and it's going down because I've got the engine running. I've got a total fuel amount of 20,304, and it's telling me that my maximum landing weight is 44,000 pounds. Yeah. So at the moment, if I tried to land on a carrier, that would not be a good idea because I'm about 14,000 pounds. Actually, no, I'm about 10,000 pounds over the maximum landing weight. So what I might want to do if I was coming back for a landing is I might want to use this switch here to dump some fuel, or of course in Flight Simulator what you can do is you can go up to the vehicle menu and take the fuel out that way. But it's nice that you've got a switch in the cockpit that you can do it with as well. The other way that you can do it if you're flashy is flying back to the carrier, you can just hit the burners and burn off a bit of fuel. That's not going to do the ozone layer any favours. But then again, dumping fuel, you're probably not going to either. So there you go, your choice. Excuse me, just a bit of a cough. So next one along, FLIR, FLIR, forward-looking infrared. Boom, like that. Yeah. Now, um, you'll see that when I went on the weapons, I had a FLIR pod on, and I've taken the FLIR pod off. Yeah. So technically, it probably shouldn't be displaying a FLIR view, but it does do anyway. But if you're nerdy about that, you could put the FLIR pod back on. But it has got a forward-looking infrared view, so if you want to land and it's foggy or something like that, you can do that. You can see things. Then what we've got is RDR, radar, boom, like that. Now, the radar's fairly simple on this, but it is functional. What it will do is you can see RWS up there. Now, if you've ever played any sort of combat jet simulators, Falcon, FA-18s, FA-18, anything like that, you will know that radars have different modes that they use. They are the sort of aperture that it uses, the speed that the radar dish um, sort of pans from side to side and all this sort of thing. And you can see up in the top left-hand corner, this has RWS on it, which is range while scan. Yeah, you have all the things like ACM, TWS and what have you. So the ACM's air combat maneuvers, TWS is track while scan. Now, that's if you're in a combat flight simulator. This thing is stuck on that setting there. So these buttons here are not going to do anything. It's these buttons down here that just let you change the mode. So you're not going to be able to sort of up the radar gain or anything like that. You can alter the range in nautical miles if you want to. So you can do this kind of thing if you want to and zoom out if you like a long way. Now, but what this does simulate is a real capability of the FA-18 Super Hornet and a lot of other modern combat aircraft. And what it is that they can data link to AWACS aircraft. So the Navy can be entirely self-sufficient in that with the FA-18 Super Hornet because the G model, the Growler, can act as an AWACS plane. So what that can do is that can fly at extremely high altitude, safely away from the combat zone, and detect stuff on radar because it's up at high altitude. And then what it can do is it can data link to the combat aircraft and send what it's detected, and that is allied to the GPS data of the fighter that you're in, and what it will do is it will overlay stuff that the AWACS plane has detected onto your radar screen as though your radar was picking it up. Now what that means is that combat aircraft these days can have targets display on their radar screen even when their radar is turned off and even when their IR sensors are turned off and what have you, and they don't need enemy aircraft to be sort of emitting stuff in order to have it display on the screen. The other nice thing about that is obviously a radar is in the nose of an aircraft and it scans from side to side, but the field of a radar can never really be much more than about 180 degrees at the front. And even if it is 180 degrees, that's quite a slow sweep for the update rate. It can't look at stuff behind. Active threats, the aircraft such as the F-18 have receivers mounted all around them that can detect sort of active radar and things like that. But it won't give you range information. It'll just give you a bearing. You can guess the range from the strength of the signal, but if you guess wrong, you're in trouble. Whereas the data link stuff from an AWACS aircraft will plonk stuff accurately on there. So you can have stuff, threats display, behind you if you want to on this thing, and that will work with the AI in your flight simulator. So if you fancy playing it, doing interceptions and stuff like that, you can do that sort of thing if you want to. Now I'm going to put that back on the FCS because I think the most relevant information that I need at the minute is the weight, because I'm going to be landing on a carrier in a bit. So there you go. That's what that thing does. So some functionality. There are some analog gauges in here as well that are backups for things. But that's about it. Apart from, of course, the head-up display thing there with it angle of attack indicator, which helps you land on a carrier, which we're going to see in a little while. Now, if I zoom this thing out like that, so that I can actually see a little bit better. And I release the brakes, which I've just accidentally knocked off. What I can do is I can put the sound back on, and I can get rid of the menu there, and then what we can do is we can taxi out, and we'll have a look at this on external view, so that we can get a better idea of what this thing looks like. Now, I'm just going to hit the brakes for a second, and what we'll do is we'll go on static external view. Move that somewhere nice. Of course, back in the cockpit, round we go. So you can see, you know, internal shadows and all that kind of stuff, and light reflections and what have you are really nicely done. And, you know, it sounds pretty good. Get this thing on the runway, then what I will do is I will show you some of the external animations that it has, because it's got some nice ones. The afterburner animation is particularly nice. In addition to the flame, it gives which goes through various colours. It does the sort of like violet and purple and yellow and what have you, and it does the little shock rings coming off it, which is nice. It also has an animation for the vapor that appears above the wings when you pull a lot of G's, and that's water vapor condensing as the pressure alters above the surface of the wing. And it also does something that the A-18 is quite famous for on a photograph, which is there's a very well-known photograph of a shock ring appearing around an A-18 as it goes transonic, and that's caused by, again, water vapor condensing as the speed varies of the airflow over it, and it has got that animation as well. Now, if I didn't really know what to do and I hadn't read the manual, what of course I could do is I could come and look down here, and I could go and look on the checklist, and I could go and look at the takeoff checklist. So parking brake on, master arm safe, wing fold match, battery on, avionics on, voltage positive, canopy closed, strobes on, APU on start, the engine started, idle at 25%, avionics stable, wing fold spread, lights as required, radios as required, flaps half, trim, takeoff, elevator trim on neutral. So we can put all that kind of thing on if we want to. Now, I haven't got the flaps set at the moment, so you can see that you know, oops, I forgot the flaps. That's going to help me out. 2 flap settings on the Super Hornet. You've got half and you've got full, so pretty simple. And the speeds that you can do that are you need to get under sort of 250 knots, really, you know what I mean? But if you want those speeds, they're in the manual. You can actually drop them a bit higher than that. And of course, being a jet fighter, it's got an air brake on it as well. So boom, we'll put some flaps down. Look on the external view, you can see that they're down. So I'm going to keep it on the external view, and I'm going to keep the engine noise on. I'm going to cheat here by hitting Shift Z so that we can see the airspeed. And what I will do is I'll play around with the afterburners a little bit so that you can see the animation of it. brakes, open the gear, and we're accelerating, so we'll get the flaps up as well. And in case you didn't believe me about me having the airliner AI on, you can see a view down on the ground there. Now, there is the infamous shock cone. And you can see that we were doing about 5 to 600 miles an hour when that occurred. And that is, I'm going to knock the sound off. We were doing about 5 to 600 miles an hour when that occurred, and that is because the airflow over the aircraft is going transonic. Some of it is going supersonic, some of it is not supersonic, and so what you're getting is areas where water vapor is condensing, and that's what causes the shock cone, which kind of looks cool. Now, the other animation that it has is, in addition to that shock cone, which keeps sort of kicking in and out, because it's sort of related to your angle of attack as well. The other one that it's got is if I pull a bit of G here, what you'll see is I'll get vapor above the wings. There we go. So it's got that too. So anytime you sort of put a bit of a load on the airframe, it will put those sort of condensation areas above the wing. Now, we've just taken off from good old Liverpool John Lennon Airport, which is sort of rapidly disappearing into the distance there because we've got a very, very fast aeroplane. And so now we are out over the sort of start of the Irish Sea with the peninsula of North Wales there. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to head a little bit south, probably on, I don't know, maybe about 220 heading, because what I want to do is I want to put a carrier out in the water, and with the SimWorks Studios add-on carriers, you can put a carrier anywhere you like, and that includes stupid places like if you get the coordinates wrong, just about to sort of accidentally beach itself. So what I want to do is I want to make sure I'm well clear of land, and you can see that I've got a bit of a sort of spit of land ahead there as well. So I want to be well clear of it, and as long as I'm sort of clear to the west, then I will be able to put a carrier just kind of out off the coast of Wales, yeah, I'm not sure what a Nimitz-class carrier would be doing off the coast of Wales unless there was some sort of zombie apocalypse, which we might well be coming to with the coronavirus. But there you go. So there you go. That was a bit topical there, wasn't it? So it's a very lovely aeroplane. Now, if you want to know whether it's an accurate depiction of the aeroplane, in terms of speeds and acceleration rates and stuff like that, I've checked it out a bit, and it is. But I am no FA-18 Navy aviator. However, that has not stopped me looking up the book figures. But what is a good way to determine that is to have a look at good footage of the roll rates that the real aircraft can do, and the sort of turns that it pulls and all this kind of stuff. And so, you know whether it's kind of depicting instantaneous roll rates correctly and all that kind of stuff. Now, fortunately, there is a really, really great movie which you can find on YouTube, which was I'm trying to remember which Marine squadron it was that did it. The Royal Maces. The Royal Maces did a video which is called Shoot 'em if you've got 'em. Which is a fantastic name for a video. So if you look on YouTube for Royal Maces, Shoot 'em if you've got 'em, you will find a video of their FA-18s doing carrier launches, carrier landings, practice bombing runs on target ranges and stuff like that. But what you can see on it is you can see how fast the things roll, how fast the things turn, all that kind of stuff, with ordnance on, without ordnance. And from that, I was able to determine that this thing does move and roll and all that kind of stuff pretty much like you would expect the real thing to do. So good job to the apparently some sort of ex-fighter pilot who helped the developer work on the flight model of this thing. Good job, and also a great job in terms of frame rates on this thing, because as you can see, even streaming fraps and with all that stuff going on and the AI flying about all over the place, this thing is not struggling at all. It runs really, really great. Now, um, that I was just talking about was so that we could get out here and have a look at placing a carrier. Okay, so now we are clear of the coast of North Wales and Anglesey, and we're heading 270 with no big land masses in front of us. What I can do is I can add one of the SimWorks Studios carriers that this DC Designs FA-18 Super Hornet is designed to work with. So when you install SimWorks Studios carriers into your flight simulator, now you can get some for FSX, but they tend to be Vietnam era carrier groups, and you can get some for P3D, and the P3D ones are Nimitz class carriers. There's two volumes of that. Volume 1 is the Nimitz and a few others. Volume 2, which is the one that I've got, has Carl Vinson, Theodore Roosevelt and Abraham Lincoln. That's CVN 70, 71 and 72. Interestingly, on CVN 72, Abraham Lincoln, there's some scene shot for the new Top Gun film, Top Gun Memory, and I think Carl Vinson, if I remember rightly, was used to shoot some scenes for the 2001 film with Owen Wilson, Behind Enemy Lines, which is not a particularly great film. It's not stunningly realistic, but a lot of the scenes were shot on Carl Vinson, as far as I am aware, and that features the FA-18 Hornet as well, although not in a particularly realistic fashion, particularly the surface-to-air missile that shoots it down, that seems to have an unlimited amount of fuel and seems to be able to take a lot of swings at it, but, you know, that's another thing. So, and those things, as I say, I paid 35 quid for that add-on, and I think that's pretty good value considering what you get. So anyway, let's add a carrier. So how do we do that? Well, what we need to do is we need to go up to the menus, and we go to the add-on menu in P3D, and you get a few things related to that SimWorks Studio. There you can calibrate your aircraft, you can change the deck configuration, so you can have the carrier landing and recovering aircraft, or you can have it you know, a clear deck, or you can have an absolutely crowded deck. You can have things. I'm not going to knock the sound off there, because I've just brought it a little bit. You can have the hangar decks full of planes. You can have it sort of running a search and rescue helicopter and all kinds of stuff like that. So there's loads of things that you can do. You can get information on the comms and nav aid radios, and you can place a fleet. So I'm going to do that as well. So I'm going to hit SWS Fleet, brings up this menu here, and Formation Abraham Lincoln, CVN 72, and click on that and pick the other ones on there if I want, but I want Abraham Lincoln. That's kind of cool. Now I'm going to have it on a bearing of 270 degrees. I can change all this stuff if I want to. I'm going to have it at a range of 16 nautical miles. I'm going to have the carrier speed be automatic. I'm going to have the sea state be automatic, as opposed to you know, a pitching and rolling deck and all that kind of stuff. And I'm going to toggle through this. I'm going to hit place formation like that, and sure enough, what that will do is that will crank up the program, and in the background it will crank up the landing signals officer. And if you can see, that has placed the carrier formation. You can probably just make it out ahead of me there as some little black dots on the horizon, but if I had placed that thing considerably further away than 16 miles and I hadn't placed it directly in front of me, I would need to be able to navigate to where that was, and I can do that by tuning in the TACAN frequency for that particular carrier. So what I would do is I would look down here, see CVN 72, frequency 114.50. So what I would do is I would place 114.50, which you can see I have done in there using the megahertz and kilohertz for that. And then what I would do is I would swap it out of my standby frequency by hitting this thing, so that 114 decimal 50 goes in there, and now it's giving me range and bearing information. 12.1 miles on a bearing of 274. Directly ahead of me is that carrier. So that's how you do that. Pretty simple. And the only thing you have to worry about is not plonking a carrier as though it's just about to head head onto the beach and stuff like that. So it will place the carrier, and it will place an escort group around it of 4 ships. Whether or not a Nimitz class carrier would have 4 ships or more, I don't particularly know, but obviously it's going to have sort of tenders and, guided missile cruisers and destroyers and a submarine screen in reality and all this lot. So there'll be, in addition to the USS Abraham Lincoln, there'll be the USS Boaty McBoatface or whatever the hell it is that's escorting it. And what have you. But really, of course, we're just interested in the carrier more than anything. But it's nice that they put the escort ships in there as well. So you can see that what I'm doing is I'm coming up on the tail of the carrier. So what we'll do is we'll pick the speed up a little bit, and we'll give it a little bit of a flyby. So you can see the range is closing down on that TACAN on the bottom left. I'm 7 miles away from it, and because I've got the speed coming on now, I'm 6.9, 6.8, 6.7, 6.5, because I'm really getting the speed on here. And what we'll do is we'll do something that you wouldn't really do in reality, unless you're sort of in an F-14 in Top Gun and you're going to buzz the tower. As they do in that movie, and we'll get a little bit of a look at the carrier. Now this, of course, is a modern carrier, Nimitz class nuclear carrier. It doesn't have a through deck; it has an angled deck. The deck is angled about 10 degrees off the direction that the carrier is heading. So we'll give that a little bit of a look, and when we get alongside it, what I will do is I will pause it so you can get a bit of a look at it thing. So I hit pause like that, and then what we'll do is we'll go on an external view, and I'll give you a little bit of a look of the carrier. So there it is. So you can see there that what I've got is I've not got the deck being particularly busy, but you can see that that is a very, very nice model of that. It's got helicopters on the deck, it's got FA-18s on the forward part of the deck there. It's got a little sort of AWACS plane there, and it's got some more Hornets on the rear of the deck, and a few guys wandering about and all that kind of stuff. And you can play around with those settings by going up to the add-ons menu, and you can configure the thing with this option here if you want to, so you can have stuff down on the hangar decks and what have you, because all of that works as well, all the sort of elevators and all that kind of thing, it all works. Now what we can see on here, if we look very, very carefully, is you can see the landing area, and I'll just zoom in a little bit so that you can see that. And what we've got, if we zoom in on that a little bit, you can see the arrestor wires there as 1, 2, 3, 4 arrestor wires. Now, those arrestor wires, the distance between the arrestor wires on most nuclear carriers is about 40 feet. So there's about 40 feet in between those wires, which means that you've got a total area that you're aiming at of about 160 feet, which is considerably smaller than the area that you aim at on a typical runway on the land. I work at, as you probably know, I work at Manchester Airport. The runway there is 2 miles long. It's 10,000 feet. Now, you would have to be a bit of a numpty pilot to not be able to get something down on 10,000 feet of concrete, but it's considerably more difficult to get your arrestor hook to trip one of those wires. And if you're doing it right, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to aim for the 3rd wire. And the reason that you do that is if your hook hits the 3rd wire, your landing gear will clear the 4th wire and it won't tangle on it. But if you happen to miss the 3rd wire, what you can do is your hook might get the 4th wire. Of course, if you're a little bit more desperate to get the thing down without making a really cool landing, what you can do is you can slam it down a little bit early and hope that you roll over the wires. But snagging the wires on your undercarriage is probably not a great idea and could possibly damage the aircraft. So there is the carrier, and pretty cool it is too. So I'll knock the pause key off, and what we'll do is we'll get up. Now, if you don't know too much about how you approach a carrier and the circuit that you fly, it's not a million miles away from how you fly a circuit in a Cessna. You basically perform a box maneuver around the thing. The heights and the speeds are a little bit different from what they would be in your Cessna, but essentially the concept is the same thing. So for a circuit to approach for a carrier, what you typically would do, I mean, there are different ways that they recover aircraft depending on what the operations that are going on, but what you typically would do is you'd fly at about 340 knots initially, and at an altitude above the water of about 5,000 feet, and that would be kind of your start point for your carrier landing, and maybe a sort of a mile or so off the side of the carrier or what have you. But it has all that stuff in the manual. So if you want to do it exactly properly and all that kind of thing, then you absolutely can do, because it's got all that information in the manual. So I'm now heading onto a reciprocal course of the carrier's heading, because obviously I had the carrier in front of me, sailing towards the west 270 degrees. So if I head 090 degrees or thereabouts, I should be set up for the circuit, and I'm doing about 360 knots, so I'm a little bit fast for it, but I'm more or less okay, and I'm at 3,000 feet, so I'm a little bit low. Should really be about 5,000 feet at this point, but we're not a million miles away from how you would be for a carrier circuit. Now, of course, what I need to do is I need to start thinking about configuring this for the landing. Now, obviously, with it being fighter, it's got speed brakes that I can deploy, so I'm going to drop the speed brakes a little bit, and I get the speed down to about 250 knots, and that means that I will be at a speed where I can start deploying flaps. So 2 stages of flaps on the Super Hornet. So first stage of flaps drops down. That's going to pitch my nose down a little bit, which typically occurs when you when you deploy flaps on an aeroplane. And my speed's bleeding off, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to increase the throttle a little bit to maintain speed. So I've got 170 knots on there. Now back in the cockpit, what I need to do is, because I'm making a carrier landing, what I need to do is I need to get the arrestor hook down, because it would be a bit rubbish if I didn't put the hook down. Now, of course, if you want to, as I say, this is the FA-18 Super Hornet F model, which is a twin cockpit model. So you could, if you wanted to, you could go on multiplayer with someone in the back, and you could have someone in the back seat. And in the back seat, what they could be doing, if you wanted to, is they could be in the back seat, and they could be sort of working the radars for you and navigating. So here we are in the back seat, and you can see that you've got a much bigger sort of moving map display on there, and you've got the MFDs that are the same, and you've got the upfront control panel and a few other bits and bobs and stuff like that. So if you do want to play this with 2 people in the cockpit, you absolutely can do that. Now, what I need to do is I need to make sure I've got the hook down, and I've just done that, and then I need to check this MFD here. Maximum landing weight for the F-18 Hornet is 44,000 pounds. I've got 40,500 pounds, so, and 7,000 pounds of fuel, so that's enough for a couple of goes at landing before I'm really going to be in trouble and find myself with not enough fuel on board. So hopefully I won't mess up the landing. I've got the hook down, I've got 1 stage of flaps down. I am currently, now it's sort of difficult to see the head-up display against the glare, so what I can do if I want to is I can put the I can either put the sort of the hood up there, or I can put the sort of horizontal situation indicator if I want to. But what that will do is, because I've got a lot of glare on the hood, what I can see is the hood repeater here, and I can cheerfully see that I'm doing 197 knots, and that means that I can get a second stage of flap down. So I can do that if I want to, and then what I can do is I can drop the gear. and check that too. Now obviously I can check that with the levers, or what I can do is I can cheat because we're in Flight Simulator, and I can have a look outside. And there we go, 2 stages of flaps, so fully configured for landing there. Flaps down, gear down, 197 knots, hook down as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get it back on the cockpit view, and I don't want to be zoomed in that much. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get myself lined up. So I'll be bleeding off quite a lot of speed in this turn. That is something that that carrier pilots do on their circuit. They make 4G turns, because obviously what that does is that bleeds off a fair bit of speed, because they did the initial setup at 340 knots, and you want to be losing some speed as you come around the circuit. You don't want to be going too slow, because obviously your stall speed increases with bank, so you want to be a little bit careful with it. But there you go. Now, obviously, with this being a nuclear carrier, CVN, it has an angled deck. As I say, that's about 10 degrees off the heading that it's going on. But keep in mind that this is where realistic weather can help you, because the prevailing wind in the UK is usually from the west, which means that the wind is probably coming from 270, 240, something like that, which is why all the runways at Manchester and Liverpool are like 27 and 24 and 23, that kind of thing. So if I've got a bit of wind, then what I can do is I can use that to assist me with my landing. Now, the landing speed of an FA-18 Hornet is about you'd be coming over the fantail at about 130 knots, something like that. Depends on what stores you're carrying, what fuel you've got on board, but it's going to be around about 130 knots-ish. Now, if you consider that the aircraft carrier is doing about 35 knots and it might be heading into a 20-knot wind, you could be looking at a 50-knot headwind for your touchdown. And if you're doing 130 knots and you subtract 50 knots from that, then your actual speed over the fantail in relation to the carrier is only going to be about 80 knots. And if you've flown airplanes in real life, you'll know that there are some GA airplanes that you do a final approach at those speeds. Might not necessarily touch down at that speed. I mean, I've flown gliders that you come in at 70 knots with. So, and I mean, that's only 10 knots slower than if I was into a 50-knot wind and coming in at 130 knots. So it's not as scary as it sounds, and the manual teaches you. But of course, I'm doing it in a flight simulator. It's probably more scary in real life. Not being a real-life naval aviator, I couldn't comment on that, but I'm guessing it is probably a bit of a pucker factor the first time you have a go at this for real. So let's see if I can do it. Now, of course, what I need to do is I need to get over on the other side of the carrier, so I need to be kind of approaching it from the starboard side, because it's an angled deck and I need to be coming over the carrier about 10 degrees angled to port off its heading in order to be lined up properly with that carrier. Now, one of the things to bear in mind is that the SimWorks Studios add-on carriers, they properly simulate the landing. So they have a landing signals officer who's in touch with you on radio, and you can configure your sim to respond to them on the radio, and all the meatball light landing system works on it. If you're not familiar with that, that's very similar to the PAPI and VASI lights that you get on runways that will indicate whether you're too high or you're too low, or whether you're lined up properly and all that kind of stuff. And what you do on a carrier is when you get close for your approach and you're coming in, the landing signals officer will radio you and ask you to call the ball, i.e. the meat ball. Now, what he means by that is, are you configured properly? Can you see the correct light configuration for your approach? And when he asks you to call the ball, what you do is you respond, Roger ball, and then you give your distance from the carrier, so what, Roger ball 1.5 or whatever, and you can configure a button on your joystick to do that sort of thing if you want to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the sound on so that we can hear that, because the landing signals officer is going to be giving me directions on that sort of thing. Now, one last check. yeah, I've got the hook down, got the gear down, got the flaps down, and the speed is okay. I want to gradually bleed that off so that I'm coming in at about 140, 130, something like that. Now the waterline marker shows the direction that I'm heading, but the actual sort of velocity vector marker, which is the circle with the 3 lines coming off it, what I ideally want to do is I want to place that so that it's going to hit the deck, because that is where I'm going. So you can see that as my speed bleeds off a little bit there, the sort of velocity marker, the little circle with the 3 lines off it in the middle of the head-up display, ideally what I want is I want to be putting that on the deck of the carrier, so that I'm going to hit the wires when I come in, and if I'm doing it really right, hopefully the 3rd wire. So you can see that I am currently not at the right angle, and I'm putting it a bit too low.
Don't sink.
A weird light
Don't sink.
configuration on the back of the carrier.
Don't sink.
So I want to pick things up a little bit.
Don't sink. Don't sink.
So this is where you have to start messing around with the trim. And then hopefully I'll get it all lined up nicely.
Don't sink. Don't sink. Don't sink. Don't sink. Don't sink.
Roger, ball.
Hopefully this is going to work. Cross your fingers, guys.
Wave off.
Don't
wave
sink.
Off.
It's waving me off because
Wave off. Wave
I've
off.
not got it very well configured.
Wave off.
Let's see if we
Wave
can
off.
push it.
Wave off. Wave off.
Don't sink. Don't sink. Don't sink.
So what happened there was I bounced it over the wire. I want to get the gear up. Take one stage of flap up. The speed's still pretty slow. Get a bit of speed on. Second stage of flap up. I get back in the cockpit and go around for another try. So, you know, that wasn't... Just turn the sound off for a second. That wasn't a terrible approach, but it wasn't the best one, clearly, because I didn't catch the wire. Now, this is why this is a fun thing, yeah, because obviously it's a good challenge to see if you can actually get this thing down. So there we are. I'm back on for another circuit here at 300 knots. Now what I'm going to do is, obviously I don't want to make this take too long, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go fairly tight on this circuit, which means that hopefully it's not going to take too long to have another swing at it, because I'm sure you don't want a review that's like 9 hours long. So let's have a look. Now I've still got the hook down, and so what I want is I want some flaps, so one stage of flaps like that, and then I'm going to start turning there, and another stage of flaps there like that, and I need to get a little bit of speed on, so I'm going to throttle it up a little bit, and I want the gear down as well. So fully configured for landing, full flaps, and the gear down and the hook down. And so what I will do is I will have another try at this approach. So I'm going to get back in the cockpit view for this, because obviously it's fairly tricky if you don't do that. So I'm going to come in really, really tight. Probably not a great idea if I want to do a good landing, but as I say, we don't want this to take forever. So there we go. There's the carrier, and we'll come round and we'll get lined up for another approach. Again, what I want to check, I mean, I already know this, but I'm going to check anyway. My weight is 37,900 pounds, so that's definitely under the 44,000, and I've got 5,000 pounds of fuel. So I'm not desperate yet, But, you know, a few more missed approaches like that, or wave offs, or actually when you skip the wire, the term is bolter. That's why what you do is you ram the throttles forward the moment you touch down, because if you don't catch that wire, you want plenty of power on. And I think I got pretty close to the water there because I thought I'd caught the wire, and then when I didn't come to a halt, it was like, oh no, better get the throttle up. So yes, what you are supposed to do is you're supposed to really ram the throttles forward the moment you touch down, and the moment you know you've caught the wire, that's when you chop the throttle. So here we go for another try, and this is going to come pretty thick and fast. So we'll get the sound back on so I can hear the excuse me, so that we can hear the landing signals officer.
Don't sink. 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 Don't sink.
Roger, ball.
Don't sink. Don't sink. Don't sink.
You're a little fast.
Don't sink. Don't sink.
You're a little fast. You're a little fast.
Don't sink. Don't sink.
There we go, missed it again. Now, gear up, one stage of flaps up. Two stages of flaps up. And around we go again. Now you can see, not as easy as it looks, is it? The LSO was giving me, you're a little fast, but he didn't give me a wave off. And I hit the deck where them wires were, and it still didn't give me the snag of the wires, yeah? And now, I am down to 4,600 pounds of fuel, so, you know, I can't really afford to mess the next one up, because if I do, then I'm going to be swimming cold. Back in the cockpit, and we'll give it another try. So I'm below 240, which means that, you know, I can cheerfully drop the flaps and everything. So let's do all that. Two stages of flaps and the gear. Already got the hook down. Check all that. There it all goes. So now I'm good. Let's give it another go. Third time's the charm, eh?
Don't sink. 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 Don't sink.
Go on, baby.
Don't sink. Don't sink. Don't sink. Don't sink. Don't sink.
Roger, boss.
Don't sink. Don't sink. Don't sink.
Wave off.
Don't
wave
sink.
off. Wave off.
Don't
wave
sink.
I
off.
don't think I can afford to
Wave
be
off.
waved off,
Wave
can I?
off. Wave off. Wave off. Wave off. Wave off. Wave off. Wave off.
There we go. Yeah, I was looking for a second like I wasn't going to make it, but you can see that we've snagged the second wire there. So I get the sound off. Now, obviously what I need to do here is I need to get the thing stopped and what have you. So in reality what would happen is I would get the engine shut down, have the guys come up, put any sort of disarming pins in the weapons. Then I would fold the wings, and then what I would do is, you know, stick the brakes on and, you know, taxi for you know, one of the sort of deck elevators, or sort of the on-deck storage, or whatever, you know, the on-deck parking and all that kind of thing. So what I can do is if I go in the cockpit, what I will be able to do is I will be able to fold the wings and raise the tail hook, and sure enough all of that is happening now. The arrestor wire is off like that, and you can start putting sort of deck chains on and all that kind of stuff if you want to, or what I can do is I can take the brakes off and I can taxi to a parking section if I want to. So if I want to do that, I can do, and I could sort of like go on the elevators and go to the decks, the hangar decks below, if I wanted to, because all of that sort of stuff operates. This thing also has, you know, animated launch officers and stuff like that, so they give you all the salute and the launch signal and all that kind of stuff, and the catapults all work on it and things like that. So if you like all that sort of thing, then it is cool. But you can see from my my sort of fairly appalling attempts at landing that it's not quite as easy as it looks. And that, I suppose, is the fun aspect of it, because what you want is you want sort of challenging stuff in your flight simulator. You don't want everything to be too easy. You want to have a bit of fun, and you want to have a bit of a challenge. And if you're looking for a bit of a challenge, then sure enough, this is going to give you that. Now, obviously, it's tight on a carrier deck. And it's, yeah, like an airfield. It's, you know, it can be pretty dangerous, and you can have this thing be really sort of replicating that if you want to. You can have all kinds of stuff going on, so you're landing when aircraft are being launched and things like that, or you can just have it be real simple, like I have it now. I'm going to use the pushback command there, which is Shift P, and that should sort of reverse my plane over to the edge of the deck, so that I can have the thing be parked a little bit. It's not going to be the greatest parking job, but you know, it will at least kind of be out of the way for someone else who's having a go at landing. And you can see now we're on deck how tight those wires really can be in terms of proximity to one another. So you know, if you like a challenge, this is certainly going to give you one. So we do that, and we've got the brakes on like that, and then what we're going to do is we're going to get the parking brake on like that, and if we, I think if I remember rightly, it's Control, Shift and full stop, and that will put the deck chains on for you. Obviously, you know, you can look at the manual for the carrier add-on. Now, what you can see here is this is actually a really nice model of the carrier. It's very well detailed, and they've not cheated either. The CVN-72 USS Abraham Lincoln is not identical to Nimitz, Carl Vinson, Theodore Roosevelt. Although they are all Nimitz class carriers, they do have some differences between them, and all of that kind of stuff is depicted with those carrier add-ons, so that's kind of cool. So there you go. If you want to do carrier operations, that's very cool. Now keep in mind, that the add-on airplane, £26.99 sterling. The add-on carrier group that gives you those three carriers, about 37 quid. But since we are currently in the middle of the zombie apocalypse, I mean the COVID-19 pandemic, if you go to a shop near me, you would think it would be the zombie apocalypse the way some people are behaving. But what a lot of online stores and flight sim developers are doing is they are offering discounts for, you know, to show a bit of solidarity around the world amongst flight simmers. You know, people that are self-isolating. Well, if you're stuck at home, here's a discount on this. One of the best examples of that is that A-18 Simulations, who are one of my favorite developers, always been impressed with them, actually have offered their AccuSim Curtis P40 Warhawk free. And that's a great add-on. I reviewed that for AvSim a few years ago, and it's fantastic. And I've long been a fan of A2A simulations, so that was a great gesture by those guys. That was really cool. And the lots of other developers are following suit and offering discounts and stuff like that. So you might see some discounts out there if you want to get hold of this combination of the aircraft carriers from SimWorks Studios and the add-on from DC Designs of the FA-18 Super Hornet. I'm not going to guarantee that that's going to happen, but it wouldn't surprise me. But even if you didn't get the discount, I think it's not a bad combination, and you're not paying an absolute fortune for it. And as you can see, it does offer a fun challenge, and anywhere in the world that's got a stretch of water, you can plonk these carriers. It's really easy to do, so you can have all kinds of fun with them. And as I say, there are loads of things that you can play with to configure the decks. You can go down in the hangar decks and all that kind of stuff. So if you like things like Navy fighters, and if you're looking forward to the new Top Gun film, or you like the old Top Gun film, or you like, you know, that Behind Enemy Lines, even though it's a bit cack in places, to be honest, it's you know, this gives you a little bit of a sniff of that world, and you can appreciate the sort of sacrifices that people make to keep us safe by serving in the Navy and the Army and the Air Force and stuff like that, because that landing on a carrier is not easy, and those guys, yeah, all right, it's a fun job and all that kind of stuff, but it's not an easy job, and it's all it's not just the guys that are in the planes, it's the guys that are on the deck doing all the launching, and all the people that cook on the ship and everything, you know, the people that clean and all that lot. Without any of those things are not getting in the air anyway. Yeah, so big salute to anyone from any force around the world who sort of helps us out and tries to keep the peace. They're very cool. So there you go. The DC Designs FA-18 Super Hornet, a good fun thing, and compatible with the SimWorks Studios add-on carriers, which makes it an even more fun thing. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this review, and as promised, now it's time for a quick word from our sponsor, which is even more fun if you like the FA-18 Super Hornet. So if you've made it this far, it's probably safe to say that you like airplanes as much as I do, in which case you'll probably be interested in taking a look at my sponsor's website, which is airmodels.net. They sell this sort of thing. display models on very nice stands that you can put on your bookcase or your desk or what have you. So a big thank you to airmodels.net for sponsoring this video. Check out their website, there's a link in the description below. Thank you. And in this sort of difficult time where we're all sort of worried about the coronavirus, make sure that you stay safe and keep watching those videos if you're stuck in your house, because I am too. So the videos are going to be coming thick and fast. So look out for another one. Don't forget to hit that notification bell and subscribe to Chock's Hangar. See you again soon.
I have you now, Tom Cruise! Your jet piloting skills and Scientology are no match for a xenophobic, cardboard cutout movie villain such as me!